I farm at Solon, Iowa. That's about 14 miles southeast of Cedar Rapids. And I'm going to tell you about some of the things that have caused us some hassle and try to save you some grief down the line. And I'll point those out as I go along. So my objective here will be to maybe shortcut some problems for you. I've been farming for 50 years, corn, soybeans, and cattle. I happen to do some other things too. I'm a director on 3 associations there, Iowa Soybean Association, National Biodiesel Board, and Soy Transportation Coalition right now. Past director of the Agribusiness Association of Iowa and several other boards. I've been around a while. We've been no-tilling since 1974. We started off with an Ellis-Chalmers planter. It's a very simple unit, just had the ripple coulters on the front, and I'm not so sure if they were even disc openers on that planter. They might have been shoes yet at that time, but we run that planter, we rented it, for 2 years, then we bought a John Deere planter with the liquid fertilizer, which we insist on using, and that was equipped nicely with no-till coulters, and it was a pretty good unit. And so since 1978, we've been all no-till, with the exception of working up some ground that we might have tiled or whatever to level it up. But no-till works very well with cover crops. We've been using cover crops for 14 years. And this particular picture just shows cover crop of corn following rye grain. You can see rye grain in the background there that's headed out, but this has starter fertilizer on, of course. We don't do this anymore. We don't follow rye grain with corn anymore. I'll tell you more about that a little bit later. Why do we use cover crops? Our top priority is erosion control. We're in a little bit of a unique situation because we're 2 miles from Lake McBride, which is a pristine lake. It identifies closely with the community, and the town depends on that lake quite a bit, so it gets a lot of use, and so we try to do everything we can to protect the water going into the lake. And we use cover crops, of course, with a lot of other conservation practices to try to keep that water clean. Sometimes in the spring we'll get some turbid water that goes in there, but at least the community knows that we're doing everything we can to try to minimize that. Another reason that's becoming more important and recognized is capturing nutrients used by the previous crop. Of course, we're interested in building organic matter. We want an organic matter as high as we can get. Organic matter is a important component of soil quality, and we're trying to improve our soil structure. We want a soil structure that can absorb water as fast as it can and hold a lot of water and air. Provides a better root medium for crop growth. This image here is a picture of rye grain. That's the root system, pretty intense root system. If it was ryegrass, there would even be more roots there. And the thing to note with ryegrass or grain, you have more organic matter below ground than you do above ground. We like the idea of a third crop in the rotation. Third crop in the rotation enhances some beneficial insects. It reduces some diseases. And of course, you got the allelopathic effect with rye. And I'm told it will suppress nematodes, corn nematodes in particular. And then I heard yesterday it may also suppress soybean nematodes. And of course, the grazing aspect, we graze rye in the fall in particular. It's good for rye to graze it because that makes it tiller more. We don't graze in the spring because we like to pull cattle out before the frost comes out of the ground. You don't get much growth before then. Other reasons you might like cover crops is that, of course, they remove CO2 out of the air, maybe some wildlife cover. Second most important decision you'll have is timing of planting. And we do some aerial seeding, some drilling. Drilling gives the most positive stand. Most of what we do is seeding with the fertilizer spreader. We used to seed a lot of it with the combination of fertilizer and seed at the same time. Gives us a one-shot application. We got our fall fertilizer done and then seeding it at the same time. We don't do that as much anymore because we don't put on much fall fertilizer anymore. When we use the fertilizer spreader, if we're going to get rain or it looks like we're going to get rain, we don't cover it. If it looks like it's not going to rain, we'll run across it maybe with a rotary harrow or something like that. We've done some frost seeding too. We've had mixed results with that. Some of the seeds that we use are rye grain primarily, some rye grass, chilies, radishes, triticale, cowpeas, oats. We like rye grain probably as good as anything, but we'll probably be moving towards more rye grass. Rye grain's got such a window, we've planted it as late as the 10th of November, and it germinated and grew and looked fine the next spring, but you're better off if you plant it earlier than that. I talked about the second most important thing that you'll do, and this is the most important, is the time of spraying. We like to spray our rye grain when the crop is about 15 to 20 inches tall. If it's wet, we'll maybe let it go a little longer because we don't want to have tracks in the field, for one thing. And the concern there is, one of the concerns at least, is once that rye kicks in late April or early May, you get a lot of growth fast, and it saps a lot of moisture out of the ground. So we're concerned about that. And managing residue too. We don't like to get it more than 15 or 20 inches tall because we've had some times when it was wrapping on the row cleaners and even more so on the spike closing wheels, particularly if it's damp. Some people will recommend spraying so many days before you plant, but we don't do that. It depends on the size of the cover crop. We use the on-farm network quite a bit. They do a good job of running strip trials for us, making some analysis and coming back to us with some meaningful results. We've used them several times and like to do that. This is a picture of some strip trials. We were trying to determine if there was any yield difference between the soybeans where the rye was planted versus the check. And this picture was taken the day that it was sprayed. Little side note here, we use some byproduct on the fields, and we need to stay 300 feet from a well. There was a well right behind me, and so that 300 foot mark would be out there where you see that difference in color. So we did get quite a bit of additional growth where the byproduct was put on. This is a picture of that same field in late July, and I was standing in the same position when I took this picture as the earlier one. We were looking for visual difference. There was none. When we combined this field to check the yield difference, it was insignificant. We had less than a bushel difference between any of the strips, and that was inconsistent at that. This is a little bit more extensive test. This is a trial on determining what might be the moisture difference and nitrogen difference. And samples were taken 24 inches deep in 3 zones, 0 to 6 inches, 6 to 12, and 12 to 24. If I can direct your attention to the column on the right, that shows the moisture percentage, and there's really an insignificant difference there as we determined it. But the column next to that, to the left of that, is nitrogen, and there was a consistent difference where the nitrogen levels in the soil were lower where the rye was than where the check was. This is what we wanted, this is what we expected, and it was consistent throughout the profile there, even down at the 24-inch level. So, and pretty significant difference too. So that rye was picking up quite a bit of nitrogen even down in those lower levels. Some challenges. One thing, get clean seed. We got some seed several years ago that had shattercane in it. We didn't know it, but it came with shattercane in it. That started to spread, and it was really a hassle because I know we, at that time, had Roundup, and we could control it in the beans, but we didn't have Roundup corn. And so we were out there with a pail, carrying that in our combine with scissors, and we'd get off and trim off those heads to keep it from spreading. And finally we got Roundup corn, and we were able to control it very well after that. More importantly, the thing I would caution you on is planting corn after rye. I told you in the first picture there that we don't do that anymore. This is why. It's an invitation to armyworms, and we've had some severe armyworm problems. And we just don't plant corn after rye anymore. Our problem may be a little bit unique because we hire all our spraying done, and when you find these armyworms out there and call the sprayer, well, that time of the year they're booked out for a day or two, and you can see a difference in the field and the chewing these critters will do in just a matter of hours. I talked to you about management residue through the planter. There's no guarantee on weather, of course, at planting time. We planted some rye a year and a half ago. It would have been August of 2012. It was a ryegrass and reddish combination. We planted a lot of it. It was dry, but I thought, well, it'll rain and it'll grow. Didn't rain, didn't grow. Complete failure. Last year we had the same situation, just as dry, so I called off the airplane before we were ready to do it and just didn't do it. I'm glad I made that choice too, because we didn't get rain for another 3 weeks, and it wasn't very significant when we did get it. But we did go out in October after we got a little bit of rain and drilled in quite a bit of rye grain, and we got a little bit of rain after we planted that, and it came up pretty good. So in summary, decide what you're attempting to do with your rye cover crop. You got a lot of options. You got the grazing option, the option to go with the tillage with the redishes, or maybe you just want erosion control, or maybe you want a nitrogen for legume. But there are several choices that you have. Sometimes combination of those work pretty well. There's a lot of information here at this show that you can pick up on cover crops and the types of seed to use. But there's a lot of other sources out there too, including the on-farm network that I mentioned and a lot of publications. Remember, most importantly, the timing of spraying is your most important decision. Watch for those armyworms if you're attempting to plant corn after rye. Another thing, this cover crop program fits very well into the Iowa nutrient reduction strategy. It's certainly a lot of the answer, not the complete answer, but a lot of it for doing what they want to do as far as the nutrient reduction strategy, because of the capturing of the nutrients and the prevention of runoff. In the east, they're doing a lot more than we have done. The Chesapeake area and most of the states east of us have done a lot more with cover crops than we have. They have some pretty good incentive programs too. One more thing that I want to talk about just a little bit related to cover crops. I happened to be in Peru a year ago right now and had a chance to tour the Sacred Valley of Peru. That's on the upper edges of the Amazon, where the Amazon River is smaller than the Des Moines River would be coming through Des Moines. And the Sacred Valley is a couple miles wide, I don't know, maybe 25 miles long. It's a perfect microclimate, it seems. 7,000 feet, mountains on both sides, and they raise a lot of corn in the valley. When we traveled through there, our guide said that they raise 3 crops a year. I thought that was pretty impressive, and the corn looked pretty good. It was, when we were through there, tossling, didn't have ears on it yet, but had good color, good height, good population. I'd guess at 140 or 50 bushel to acre at least. And he went on to say that they don't use any fertilizer or chemicals. And that, I thought, well, that's interesting too. And I says, well, they won't be doing that very long. And he says they've been doing it for 800 years. And come to find out that they were using a companion crop. This was, as we looked back in the field, you could see it. It was a low ground cover type of material, kind of a viney, small leaf, obviously a legume that was providing nitrogen for the next year. So I thought that was pretty impressive. They did have a little manure too that they put on there, a few cattle in the valley, but not that many. But I thought that was pretty interesting, something we'll probably be seeing a little more of around here too. So